I don't see the Republican Party coming out of this far-right Trumpism mentality anytime soon. What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video with me, Tim. I am the creator and facilitator of the new Evangelicals. I am happy to actually respond to this video. I found this clip, really this whole segment, this past Sunday when Russell Moore, who is the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, went on Meet the Press to talk about Trump's recent court case where he was found liable for sexually assaulting a woman and what that means for evangelicals. And I must say, you know, these days, I'm not really someone who would identify as a conservative evangelical. I grew up in that world my entire life. I was steeped in those waters. I really had a wake-up call, a come-to-Jesus moment, I guess you can say, when Trump took office in 2016. I was so perplexed that my own faith tradition was mad at me because I couldn't vote for a guy who they taught me is everything I should never be as a human being. And here we are 6-7 years later, and Trump has really taken over the evangelical right, which has always, to this day, perplexed me. Well, Russell Moore, who is someone I would characterize as a conservative evangelical, has been pretty consistently anti-Trump, and I have to applaud him for that. You know, Russell and I, he's been on the podcast before, we've talked before, he's a nice person. We have some massive disagreements on some pretty serious issues, but I really respect his consistency when it comes to why he could never vote for Trump, even though it's cost him quite a lot. It's cost him a lot of flack in his own spaces. There's a movement now in far-right evangelical spaces. I call it Christian nationalism. You might call it far-right evangelicalism, whatever, that now is trying to make it seem like Russell Moore is a Democrat or that he's quote-unquote woke, which I think just shows how far gone and how far right so many of these spaces have drifted over the past 7 or so years. So I wanted to maybe bring you some good news that not all conservative evangelicals are far-right Christian nationalists. So I wanted to respond and go through this segment where Russell Moore hopped on NBC's Meet the Press to talk about Trump and all of what that entails. So let's go through it together and see what he has to say.
Welcome back. Republicans once demanded morality in their politicians. Now it appears not so much. Just listen to what Lindsey Graham said on this program as House Republicans weighed whether to impeach Democratic President Bill Clinton 25 years ago for obstruction of justice and perjury.
It's one thing to go and commit a crime. It's another thing to flaunt it in front of the American people and never admit to your wrongdoing. If the president would have the character to come forward and admit to the wrongdoing that I think is obviously there, then maybe I would treat him differently. What I'm looking for is a president that has a character trait to lead the American people, that will put his interests secondary to the American people. I'm looking for somebody who's repentant, somebody who understands they made not just a mistake but violated the law. The law allows people to be treated differently if they'll come before the court and said, I'm sorry, I'm guilty. But somebody that plays the games to the bitter end, tries to have it both ways, dances on the head of the pin, in my opinion, has forfeited their right to lead this country.
So, does character matter in the Republic?
Can you imagine that? Could you imagine? I mean, think about how far the Republican Party and the evangelical right has come since the Bill Clinton days. I remember when Franklin Graham, wrote a whole article talking about how Bill Clinton's sexual misconduct in the White House was an indication that we can't trust him to lead the nation, which, by the way, I agree with. Like, if Bill Clinton was able to run again for president, I would not vote for him, given his own history. I don't trust him at all. But it seems like the evangelical right said that when it was convenient for them, when a Democrat did it. But now that Trump was the president and Trump is still in the air that all these people are breathing, somehow Trump's egregious sexual misconduct, and now we know legally sexual assault, is completely minimized because he's God's chosen person. It truly is mind-blowing.
Party. Russell Moore has been one of the highest profile conservative evangelical voices speaking out against Donald Trump. From 2013 until his resignation in 2021, he was the president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, he's the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. Dr. Moore, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me, Chuck. Good to be with you.
I want to repeat the last sentence there from Senator Graham. Again, 25 years ago, this was Lindsey Graham. Somebody that plays the games to the bitter end, tries to have it both ways, dances on the head of a pin, in my opinion, has forfeited their right to lead this country.
Yep.
I want to get your reaction to that. That was 1998. Where are we today?
Great question.
Well, it was right in 1998, and it's right now. And that's part of what's so confusing to many of us who were taught in the 1990s that character matters and are now told by often the very same people that it doesn't. I mean, evangelical Christianity emphasizes that the internal affects the external. And the fact that a person's character in private has everything to do with his or her character in public. That has always been the case, and that's always been the issue here, is does character matter or does it not?
I mean, he's completely on the money. He's 1,000% on the money. This, and I'm someone who grew up in evangelical spaces my entire life. Character counts was a mantra that was drilled into my head as a child, as a teenager. My own sexual ethics at the time came out of purity culture because I was told that God wants to work with people that follow him and listen to his commands. And all of a sudden, when Donald Trump was caught on a hot mic, bragging about sexually assaulting women, all of a sudden it turns out God can use people like Donald Trump. I mean, it's really amazing to see the 180 that so many evangelicals made when Trump came on the scene.
Former Vice President Pence was kind of dismissive of the defamation verdict against with E. Jean Carroll against the former president. Saying, well, I think this is something that the media cares more about. It was shocking. That was a shocking reaction for me coming from the former vice president. Was it to you?
I'm not sure what's going on in Vice President Pence's mind at this point. I know it was a shocking moment for me, even after everything that we've seen. And what's primarily shocking is the fact that here we are in a week where a former president of the United States is found liable for sexual abuse and sexual assault and defamation of a woman who survived such abuse and assault, and the country just yawns for the most part. That tells me that something has really, really badly gone awry in this country. And you add to
He's on the money here, friends.
The demeanor and the content of President Trump's deposition to simply shrug off and defend the Access Hollywood comments. In 2015, I said that President Trump had or Donald Trump at the time, had the attitude toward women of a Bronze Age warlord. In that deposition, he said, as a matter of fact, predated it back to millions of years ago and said, unfortunately or fortunately, that's the way that it is. Well, think about the teenage girl in a church somewhere who's being abused by her youth pastor, wondering whether to come forward. And she hears not only that, but when the victim is ridiculed by a presidential candidate in front of a crowd, the response is laughter. That has devastating implications.
I mean, we need to, I feel like Trump has made so many things normal, like trying to overthrow a democracy, like lying all the time. I mean, listen, we all know that politicians, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever, have a habit of spinning things, right, to make themselves seem as good as possible and their opponents as least ethical as possible. We understand that. We understand that politics in America has always had problems. There's always been issues. But Donald Trump has taken those things to another level and then normalized them in a culture that claims to have the objective truth of God's word. And here we are in 2023, where evangelicals still believe, many of them, that the election was stolen, even though we emphatically know, objectively speaking, it was not. We have a man who stands in front of them and says, "I will be your champion," to a round of applause, then is found liable for sexually assaulting a woman, and evangelicals pretty much, like Russell said, yawn and say, well, no one's perfect, and they start using terrible excuses, or even worse, they might appeal to the Bible. Well, David was a man after God's own heart, and look what he did. I mean, the excuses it's ridiculous, right? But Joe Biden is destroying America. It's never a charitable take towards their political opponents. And I think Russell is spot on when he says, think about the girl who is being sexually abused by her youth pastor and sees the evangelical champion saying these things and then sees the crowd laughing along. What kind of message are we sending to people who are in our church spaces? Certainly not one of justice, of love, of integrity, of an ethic of mercy and community. It's really shocking to me still that Trump has normalized such egregious immoral ethics in our country, especially among the people who oftentimes are the loudest voices, with a bullhorn insisting that they are representatives of the all-powerful being of the universe. What a huge claim to make, and what a miss to then say, well, Donald Trump is the person that God is supporting. Horrible.
You know, 8 years ago, when Donald Trump first ran, there was a divide inside the evangelical community, and there was a lot of hand-wringing, and many came down on the side of, well, if the choice is between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump will appoint the judges that I like. You seem to indicate, after Donald Trump announced his re-election plans after the November 2022 midterms, that you didn't sense a divide anymore in the evangelical community, that politically they're all in. Do you still sense that?
Totally.
Well, I think that's probably true with the politically activated, politically energized base. I don't think that's true of everyone. And that's one of the reasons why we see churches divided, we see families divided. I mean, one of the most dismaying aspects of the Trump years is the fact that Donald Trump is at the center of everything. Almost every congregation that I know is either divided or tense about these sorts of political controversies coming out of the Trump years. Almost every family that I know has people who don't speak to each other anymore about this personality and this figure. And I think there are a lot of people, including conservative evangelicals like me, who are looking at this and saying, are we really going to do this again? Haven't we seen this already? Do we really want to repeat it?
So I have a different take here than Russell. I think he's right in a lot of ways, but the evangelical institution and the industrial complex that exists out there is all in on far-right politics. And what I mean by that is, sure, there could be people in those spaces who aren't huge fans or maybe think it's a little extreme, but the people who have the power, the people who have the money, who have the influence, at a minimum, they tolerate this in their ranks. I mean, listen, I'm not sure if you're out there and you remember when Rob Bell, okay, that's a pretty big evangelical Christian name for a lot of us who grew up in those spaces. When Rob Bell wrote the book Love Wins, and John Piper tweeted, "Farewell, Rob Bell." Rob Bell was kicked out of the entire industry. He stopped getting the calls. He stopped getting the publishing deals. He was gone. So the evangelical industrial complex absolutely can kick people out who they don't want platformed in their circles. And the fact that Trump has the ear of so many high-profile evangelical leaders and pundits who represent millions of evangelicals, the fact that people like Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA, Candace Owens, Matt Walsh, Ali Stuckey, etc., are all platformed and listened to by millions of white evangelicals in particular, should tell us the state of evangelical culture. And it's not good. When people like Russell Moore are in the minority for saying what should be the obviously ethical thing to say, it's not as divisive as we might think. I don't think that evangelicalism is as split as maybe Russell Moore might say it is from my vantage point. At a minimum, they tolerate this stuff. At worst, they're actually breeding far-right politics and Christian nationalism. One thing I'll bring up to kind of prove my point is PRRI did a whole study on Christian nationalism. Long story short, they found that, yes, 30% of Americans have some kind of Christian nationalist view, which is a minority, but 3/4 of white evangelicals hold Christian nationalist sympathies. So it's highly concentrated in white evangelical spaces.
And I suppose that will be the question for the rest of the year.
What would you like to see from other candidates? I mean, it seems that there very much don't want to make a character case against the former president.
Which is shocking.
Well, I think someone needs to step forward and talk about the importance of character and talk about the importance of having someone who can be trusted to have the nuclear codes. I mean, we really need someone to step forward and say, let's remember what's at stake here. We're not just choosing what kind of entertainment we're going to have for the next 6 years. We're talking about the direction of the country, and we're talking about what our children are seeing and potentially will replicate. If you have an entire generation who only grow up seeing this, what's going to happen? We need somebody who will make that case and say it. And right now, among candidates, among elected officials, sometimes even among church officials, there's fear. No one wants to speak to this because they're afraid of what will happen to them.
He's totally right. Going up against Trump is essentially a suicide mission at this point. Trump is incredibly powerful. He's incredibly well funded, and he has the ear of right-wing media pundits. And also, how would a Republican candidate come up in the ranks and say, hey guys, I think Trump is ethically immoral, the election was not stolen, and we need to have integrity in the Republican Party? He or she will be laughed out so quick, because think about who currently is in power. Think about, for example, friends, think about Marjorie Taylor Greene. 2 years ago, she was seen as some fringe right-wing lunatic who was censored by her own party and by Democrats. 2 years later, she's essentially Kevin McCarthy's best friend. In fact, she took over the House of Representatives when Kevin McCarthy couldn't make it one day. And this is a woman who spoke at the white nationalist rally hosted by Nick Fuentes a year ago. How does anyone come into the Republican Party and say, hey, we have to bring integrity and honesty back and actually succeed? Liz Cheney is gone. Adam Kinzinger is gone. They were vilified by their own party for being on the January 6th commission. I don't know how the Republican Party puts up any kind of candidate that has any kind of serious integrity with more conservative values like the ones that Russell Moore might or might not have. I don't know how that happens at this point.
The stakes are too high.
Last question, is there any circumstance you could imagine supporting Donald Trump?
Well, I can't speak for all evangelicals. I can only speak for myself. And Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I'll let my never, never.
Dr. Russell Moore, the editor-in-chief of Christianity Today.
There it is.
Appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective with us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jeff.
I mean, there it is, friends. I wish that Russell Moore was the typical evangelical voice right now in America, but he's not. This is seen as like an outlier regarding his view on Trump as a conservative evangelical. And listen, as far as I know, Russell Moore is pretty conservative. I don't think he's affirming. I think he's pretty pro-life. I think he holds to a pretty, typical evangelical view of biblical inerrancy. I don't think he's at all that progressive. Him and I would have some major disagreements on many of those issues. But man, Russell, my hat's off to you for at least being consistent and for saying what should be the obvious. And I don't know about you, friends. I would love to know maybe in the comments or maybe you can shoot me a message, but I don't see the Republican Party coming out of this far-right Trumpism mentality anytime soon. I just don't. I look at who they're platforming. I look at who gets the most views. I look at who Charlie Kirk has on his show. It's Lauren Boebert. It's Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's people like Donald Trump. It's Matt Gaetz. These are people who are, in my view, are not to be trusted, period. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to see a decent Republican candidate. I want more political choices than Joe Biden. Okay, I'm not happy at all that he's running. So don't misunderstand this video as me saying, only Democrats can do good. I would love to see a Mitt Romney actually run in debate and actually hear what he has to say, for example. But we are way past that moment. Mitt Romney is also vilified by his own party. And he was the person who ran against Obama. Think about how far we've come in such a short time. So let me know, am I way off on this? Do you think that I'm exaggerating? Do you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments. I'll talk to you all next time.